Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 5, Nothin but Nolan. We are past the 1 month mark of this podcast, Alex.
We are. We've made it a whole month. I'm proud of ourselves. And big news, this is, at least to us, I think this is exciting. This is going to be the first week that we share on social media, that we're actually going to share among our friends. Right now, we've just been sending it to a few people to get feedback, and now we're going to start taking it a little public. I'm excited about it, and obviously we do this because it's fun, but it's also fun to share it with other people.
Yep. So welcome to anyone who's new. Hopefully you get to learn something out of this. And so for this first one, we are going with a director that I really enjoy, Christopher Nolan. He has some amazing films in many ways. So let's just do a little background on him first. Do you want to kick it off with that?
Yeah, sure. So Christopher Nolan is a British-American filmmaker. He was born in 1970, so right now he's about 46, still a fairly young guy, but established in the industry. He did go to school, but not as a film major. He went as an English major. But while at school, he did make several short films, and eventually ended up working as a scriptreader and camera operator for various industrial videos and commercials in the London scene, until eventually he was in this film union with with a few other people in London, and they had a group of equipment, so he made some connections there, and he put them together and made his first feature-length film called Following in 1998, which is currently part of the Criterion collection. So if that's anything to judge by, it went fairly well.
Yeah, it became a I don't know, what do you call that? A film buff success?
I don't even know if you could call it a cult hit, because so many people who I know who really like Christopher Nolan's work don't know Following.
Which is a shame, because it's so good. Right.
It's almost, I mean, I don't want to call it a B-sides hit, but it's almost like a B. You think of that like a B-side track that's really good that not a lot of people have heard of. That may be a little offbeat, but you go take a look at it, and it's worth the time and worth the investment.
Yeah. So that is actually the first film that we watched this week, and the other two that we watched are The Prestige and Interstellar. So this is the first week that we've really gotten to take a director who went from true independent filmmaker to now huge critical and box office success with his films. So it's been a really interesting journey to kind of pick these 3 films which get progressively bigger in budget and concept, and really see how Christopher Nolan has grown through these films.
Right. And I know everyone has a favorite filmmaker, and I know for you that is Christopher Nolan. So I know you were very excited about this week to really dig into these in a more analytical viewpoint, maybe. Although maybe you've done that already.
Yeah. No, especially The Following and some of these lesser known films from Christopher Nolan, because after The Dark Knight especially, a lot of people became interested in his films. Batman Begins too, but obviously The Dark Knight really kicked him off,
launched him into mainstream celebrity and success.
Yeah. So going back before that and getting to talk through just how intelligent his filmmaking was from the beginning, from Following, is going to be really great.
Right, because a lot of people like to look at movies like Interstellar and Inception and say that they're super complex and very cerebral. But that's something that's been present in his film since day one. And both The Prestige and Following are pre-Dark Knight and very interesting to look at. And actually, Following is officially our lowest budget movie to
Oh, is
date.
it?
It is. I believe Primer was made for about $7,000. Of course, I had to convert this from pounds, but Following was made for about $3,000 in the United Kingdom. It's actually his only British film before he transitioned to Hollywood, where you can get funding. But he just scraped it together with friends, and he shot it over the course of the year. So it's what you call a no budget film, which is something that I thought you and I had come up with. At
Oh
least
no.
at least the name for it, but no, it's. I mean, Christopher Nolan uses it in almost all of his interviews, talking about the following.
Yeah, and then we have The Prestige, which comes out right after Batman Begins. So Batman Begins, clearly one of his biggest, things that got him notoriety, and it increases some of these motifs that we see in a lot of his films, such as, the time, something that I've been calling temporal cross cutting, which we'll talk about later, and just really complex plot structures that jump back and forth in the narrative and then all meet at the end, which at the end we see kind of how everything comes together. We get all the pieces from the middle to make the beginning and the end make sense. It's really fascinating way that he puts together his films, which we can see in The Prestige and Following especially, and which we can see how it transitions into other films like Interstellar and Inception.
Right. And Interstellar is that big one that everyone knows about, and everyone knows that it's confusing to watch, which I really don't think it is. After you've seen it once or twice, it's really not too confusing, but it is.
There's just a lot packed into it.
Right, and it's presented in a very unique way, and it takes this plot structure, or story structure, I should say, that Nolan likes to mess around with in terms of time and the reveal. Some would say the prestige.
The Prestige.
The prestige. We'll get to that later. And actually encodes it into the world of the story in Interstellar, where that is actually, he actually travels through time. But in his other films, traveling through time is done through the magic of movie making. And it's definitely something that he likes to play around with, and how you present the story, in what order, and what significance that gives to certain things, and how that creates tension. And that's mostly what we're going to be talking about this week, is his obsession with time, but also a lot of other things, because he's a very nuanced auteur that's been very successful, and had been very fortunate in having the resources to make movies both on the scale of Following and on the massive scale of Interstellar.
Yeah, absolutely. So do we want to jump into Following now? And for Following and The Prestige, we're going to see how much we could talk about them in the no spoiler section, because there's definitely some big spoilers in the Following the Prestige. Interstellar 2 a bit, but not quite as much.
Right. I feel like Interstellar is a hard movie to spoil.
Yeah.
In and of itself.
Even if we try and describe the ending, you got to see it to really understand it.
Right. Exactly. But for both Following and The Prestige, just partly from the order they're told in, it makes it very hard to talk about the beginning without talking about the end.
Yeah. So we'll do our best, though.
Right.
Starting with Following, just stylistically, at first I was thinking that we're getting more, and I know we've been talking about this a lot the last couple of weeks, but it really has a big influence on all of these directors, is the French New Wave. And then as I was watching it more, I was like, I don't even know, because I think it's almost pure film noir, which was one of the biggest influence of the French New Wave. And Christopher Nolan really knows his noir, because this, I think, ranks with some of the best film noir, like Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity and all the rest.
Right.
It's fascinating to see how the story is told, and the way he messes with trust and mistrust in the characters, which is what film noir is all about.
Right.
Is the light and dark side of people, which is obviously brought out in the lighting and everything about the production of these films. And Christopher Nolan, right off the bat, I think jumps in with the best of the best with this story.
Right, right, and it all kind of harkens back to that the big shift that you see in film as an art form in the mid 19th, or sorry, mid 20th century, because that's when you see noir and the French New Wave kind of emerge and become popular. Of course, noir kind of came out before the French New Wave, so they definitely build off of each other, and you can see that you can see them kind of combine in the following. I think the French New Wave kind of maybe comes more from the fact that it's a no budget film, and Italian neorealism and the French New Wave are both kind of based off of the we almost have no resources because World War II just happened, so let's make a movie with what we have. And they're both very dark movements, and following is very dark. But I think as a genre, if you can call film noir a genre, and I think you can, following definitely fits in that category of this dark mystery going on and characters caught in each other's plots as they go along. And I just realized we haven't actually said what following is about. We've just alluded to it.
Right. Okay. So I was going to come around to the point that I think all of these films, almost all of Christopher Nolan's films, just completely are written by Christopher Nolan and often assisted by his brother Jonathan Nolan. So these are all writer-director collaborations. So I mean, these are coming straight from him, and this is going to go into the idea of Christopher Nolan as kind of an underrated auteur, I feel like, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay, so the story of the following follows I guess he's an unnamed character who is a out of job writer, and he's in the city by himself. And so the way he passes time is following people that he thinks are interesting on the street. And so this is all set up for us at the very beginning of the movie. He basically just wants to see where they're going and stuff like this. And he has a set of rules, and he doesn't follow people twice. He kind of just uses it as research for his writing until one of the people he's following notices that he's following him and interacts with him, and their fates get entangled from there.
Right, because the person he follows turns out to be, at least in my opinion, this complete psychopath. Named.
But on the surface, he's a thief, a kind of sophisticated thief.
He's the gentleman thief character.
Which is an interesting concept.
Right. I mean, it's a classic one. I mean, dating back to like Robin Hood, that you see pop up a lot. It's a very well known character, and his name is Cobb, which is interesting because later on, Nolan would use the same name again for a different gentleman thief named Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio in Inception.
Another noir crime thriller.
Right. But this Cobb and following teaches our protagonist, the young man, to how to break into people's homes and how to rummage through not their most costly possessions, but their most personal possessions. And there's this theme of a box. Everyone has a box that they keep their most sensitive personal possessions in, and they go through and they rummage it, and not for personal gain, but to shock the people that are being robbed.
Yeah, it's kind of a psychological robbery more than a physical robbery.
Right. It's this very I don't know how to put this in the correct English phrasing here, but it's like a psychological thriller mind game type power play that is that's present in a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies, but it starts here. This is like the first one where these two guys are breaking into people's homes, and they are just messing with them to shake up their lives and show them what they could lose by someone breaking into their home. And
Yeah. So, for
eventually,
example, one of the things that they'll do that he does to mess with people is, first of all, he goes through the box, the personal box, and he doesn't take anything. He just dumps it on the ground, so they know someone has looked at this box, which is all of my most intimate little trinkets and stuff. And then another time, he'll take one earring from a lady's jewelry, and so that way she knows that the pair hasn't been stolen, but now it's useless because she only has one. So he just does these little things just to mess with them.
right,
Because that's just the kind of sick, twisted character that he is.
right. And eventually they meet this woman whose house they've broken into, and I can't say too much more without giving it away, but the plot kind of spirals out of control from there, and it's all within the frame of the young man giving an interview to the police. That's the opening scene. That's the first thing you see is this young man giving an interview to the police, and that's where we're at. The whole story is a recap essentially from this point in time. So it's all within the frame of his viewpoint, this subjective viewpoint, and possibly flawed viewpoint, which is something else you see a lot in Christopher Nolan movies, is that they're very subjective, and that what we're seeing might just be what the character sees, and not an honest representation of the truth.
Yeah, and there's a lot of technical things that we see starting here and following, and which he really builds on, and once he gets more resources, kind of develops in later films. For example, his use of temporal cross-cutting, which we can get into now, which basically cross-cutting is when you have two storylines going at the same time, and you're cutting in between them. So one scene will end for one character, and then you cut to a scene for another character, and then so that way if they're both doing things at the same time, you get both of them. You get an idea of both of them without one carrying through their entire journey and then the other one. But what Christopher Nolan does is he will take a scene from later on in the chronology and cut it into the beginning of the chronology without any warning. He just kind of throws it in. There's a shot in following where, I mean, we've been following this no-named character, and all of a sudden we cut to a scene of him laying on this roof with a glove stuffed in his mouth, and he coughs it up. And we're like, oh, okay, so what happened? And then
Right, it feels very
and
random.
now, and it's almost his way of using a hook. Like his story has, if you just lay out the story chronologically, it has its plot structure, it has a hook and everything. But he uses this to accentuate it by saying, okay, well now I have to watch and see what happens to him to have him beat up, coughing up a glove. Like how do we get from what I know about him so far to that point? So it's
Right.
a really interesting way of engaging the audience and making them trying to piece things together from both ends of the story at the same time.
Right, it's a very engaging way to tell a story, especially a noir mystery type film that's very dark, and you know the character isn't really sure what's going on. You're not really sure what's going on.
You're not sure of people's motivations, so essentially anyone could be the cause for this foreshadowing that you've already seen.
Right, and it's a testament to Nolan's skill that he's able to do all this cross cutting, and it still makes sense. And it's not terribly hard to track. You can follow along with it. The best example in following is the appearance of the young man throughout the film. You'll notice chronologically, he starts off with really baggy, loose clothing and a leather jacket and long, greasy hair, and then you see him in
a 5
nice
o'clock shadow.
Right, and then you see him clean shaven in like a suit. I hesitate to say a nice suit, but a suit. And
We're still talking no budget here, so
right. You can tell, maybe the clothing doesn't fit the best, but a suit and like he got a haircut, and then later on you see him a little beat up, and then later on you see him very beat up. So you're wondering, you can keep track of where he is in the timeline based on his appearance at the given time. So you see him start following people with the long hair, and then you see him waking up unconscious with the glove in his mouth with short hair and a black eye, and you're like, okay, this happened way after this. There's a medium. So every time we cut back to a scene with him with long hair, you know that it happened before the glove bit, even though there's no preamble, there's no voiceover saying this happened in April and this happened in June or whatever. But the visual cues just keep the audience following along with where you are in the story.
right. And this cross-cutting is something that we see in all three of these films that we watched today to one extent or another, and are carried to a different level in kind of a dimensional cross-cutting in Inception, where it's probably the most obvious, where we have characters jumping in and out of dream levels and levels of reality. And in that film, we take this cross-cutting to such an extent that by the end of the film, we have no idea which level we're on, which is totally the point, and it works so well. But we can see the seeds of that starting in this film.
Right. You can also see the seeds of the little personal box that you later see in Inception, the little personal safe.
Oh, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
Go out. Yeah. Nolan is a fairly consistent auteur, which is impressive. I mean, he's still very young. He has time to show us a different side of him. And I'm not saying that I see anything lacking in his work, but he's been very consistent with his very cerebral, complex themes from day one, which is fascinating. One of the last things I want to talk about with Following is more on the technical approach that Nolan takes to filmmaking, along with the technical approach that comes along with no budget filmmaking, which both you and I have experience with.
Right. Well, in our limited experience, but some, yes.
Right. And that's, it's this practical filmmaking with the physical, and learning to use these limitations as opportunities for creative solutions. So, for instance, you'll notice in the movie, as weapons, you tend to see physical objects like a knife or a hammer instead of guns. And we'll post an interview where Nolan talks about how on a low budget movie, the gun tends to look fake. It's hard to get a decent looking prop gun on the cheap.
I mean, I just happened to notice that with no budget films, guns don't work very well, because you can never get the right replica gun. It's never got the weight to it. You can't fire blanks with it. You can't, and so whenever you'd see that in somebody's student film or whatever, it would always seem to give the budget away or seem a bit, whenever. So we used, a hammer instead of a gun because we could do a hammer cheaply and make a rubber hammer that we could, smash the guy's fingers with or whatever.
But in choosing the hammer, they have an effective plot point in a weapon, but it also lends more to the mood and the atmosphere and like the creepy, gritty realness of the film that goes into it.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, torture with a hammer is more graphic imaginatively than torture with a gun is. So, the gun may have been an easier option if he had the resources for it, because you see guns in movies all the time and there's no ambiguity, but the hammer ends up being a more creative and interesting and disturbing element overall.
Yeah, it really does. It's a more intimate weapon, which feels like a weird way to think about weapons, but
yeah.
But it is.
Then again, in the interview, he talks about how it's easier to make a rubber hammer to use on set than it is to fake a gun and gunshots and stuff, especially in a time before consumer level visual effects.
Right, right, exactly. And even then, consumer level visual effects sometimes show as consumer level visual effects.
Usually pretty dead giveaways.
Right, 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 right. I don't know about you. I find guns boring. I don't know if that's a very popular opinion, but I feel like they're so ubiquitous in films these days that's just kind of become like a boring passe visual to see a gun. So for me, when I watched The Following, seeing a hammer used as a weapon was a much more interesting choice to see. It kind of made it stand on its own and give it its own artistic flavor, other than, oh, they're using a gun again. I guess that's exciting.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that, and I think that a lot of directors understand that. I mean, what makes the razor blade scene in Reservoir Dogs so resounding? I mean, it's the fact that it's such an unusual choice of weapon, and I mean, if he just like was shooting his arm or something, it would not have been as completely and utterly disturbing as the razor blade scene. That I won't go into too much detail, but
Right,
it's just a completely different vibe than using a gun. It's just boom, over.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that guns can't be exciting. Of course, they can be used in an exciting
Yeah,
way.
there's lots of different ways you can do it, but
they become a crutch so easily. I think where you think, oh, there's a gun in a scene, it's automatically exciting. But that's not necessarily the case. There's more that goes into a scene than the presence of a gun. But anyway, I digress. On to the next film, The Prestige.
Which does have guns in it.
It does have guns, but it has interesting early
Interesting
20th,
uses
late
of
19th century
Yeah.
guns. Yeah.
Yeah, and it uses guns in a unique way and not
Yeah, not in
it
a...
uses guns in a couple ways. So it's actually interesting.
The gun actually takes a big role, but it doesn't take a big role in the way you'd think.
Right. So do you want to just tell us what The Prestige is about before we jump in?
Sure thing. As much as I can tell you what The Prestige is about.
Yeah, this
without
one is
giving it all away.
This one is the biggest spoiler alert. So
I think we can talk about it pretty loosely without giving away.
Yeah, we're gonna be
very
vague right now, and then later on we're gonna give us a spoiler warning and dig really deep into it.
Right. So The Prestige follows two magicians in the early 1900s, one played by Hugh Jackman, that's Angier, and the other played by Christian Bale, that's Borden, in their competition to figure out each other's magic secrets, but also to take revenge on each other over a series of possibly accidents, possibly intentional injuries to each other over the course of their careers that slowly escalates their feud and their obsession with each other and this one-upmanship that eventually drives them to some pretty extremes. And it all starts when they're both assistants to the same magician who is fairly unimportant to the plot. But Angier, or I'm just going to refer to them by their actors' names because that'll be easier to follow. So Hugh Jackman's character's wife dies in a magic accident, which is a slightly whimsical accident to refer to. But anyway, he blames Christian Bale's character because he might or might not have tied a purposely really hard knot on Hugh Jackman's wife before she went into the dunk tank. And from there, the one-upmanship and the sabotaging of each other's magic tricks that ends in personal injury escalates a little more and a little more and a little more. And it's all set to the background of the scene you see at the start of the film, which is Hugh Jackman's character dying in a magic trick. And Christian Bale's character is accused of the murder. While in jail, Christian Bale is unraveling a journal left to him by Hugh Jackman's character, which he's trying to decode and figure out Hugh Jackman's tricks. Now, in the journal story where Hugh Jackman is, Hugh Jackman has a journal from Christian Bale's character, and he's trying to decode Christian Bale's secrets and tricks. So it's a journal within a story, and as you can see, that complexity of a Christopher Nolan movie is very present, but it's also not hard to follow. Again, partially because of visual cues, partially because of locations, because certain segments of the story happen in certain places, partially due to presence of certain characters. For instance, Christian Bale's wife, Sarah Borden, is present in certain parts of the film and not other parts of the story. Scarlett Johansson's character is present in certain parts of the movie and not certain parts of the rest of the movie. And it's not terribly hard to follow, but it is hard to describe.
Well, I'll say it's unclear for most of the film until the end. At the end, everything gets cleared up. So it's a little hard to follow, but as long as you're, like, I guess, retaining your memory of what events happen in the film, then by the time you get to the end, you've caught up with yourself.
Right. Christopher Nolan's movies always pay off in the end. If you stick with it and you actually finish the movie, it makes sense the first time through. Except
Inception. But we won't go there. That's not on our list this week.
That's not on the list this week. I will say that's purposefully ambiguous, but
it's a intentional exception.
Right. But not this week. Nope. maybe for Christopher Nolan 2.0. We shall see.
So, but speaking of Inception, and I'm trying not to talk about it too much, but it really is one of Nolan's defining films, and we can see a lot of culmination of the things, especially in these first two films, that kind of come to a climax in Inception, is the way you just described a journal inside of a journal inside of the story. I mean, what does that sound like? It sounds like Inception's idea of a dream within a dream. So it's really interesting how all this cross-cutting, Nolan is such a master at using this storytelling technique to keep his audience engaged and guessing what's going to happen, because they know little bits and pieces from here and there, and you're trying to keep it all together and incorporate all the new bits and pieces of information that you're getting all the time.
Right, exactly. I kept finding throughout the week as I was watching these movies that almost all of the main characters in Nolan's films are obsessive, like really just purely driven towards one goal or one object, which makes for a really interesting protagonist. But it also makes for a fairly consistent signature when you're looking at the feel of a movie. When the protagonist is just driving towards one object, and that's kind of destructive towards the rest of their life. And it's not just something that you see in most of his single films, but also his big series, the Batman trilogy. You also see obsessive characters there, big time, actually. That's one of the big
we're
themes.
Going to see it in Interstellar, but there are characters where their obsession isn't inherently a bad thing. Like in Interstellar, Coop's obsession is his family and getting back to his family, which is not inherently a bad thing. It just kind of motivates him to make decisions that might not be the best ones because he's very biased in them. And then some characters are kind of as a foil to obsessive characters. Some characters just want to watch the world burn. Sorry, yeah. I had to.
You had to get it in there. You had to get the reference in. Nah, it's okay. It's okay. We might have some opportunity to look at some Batman things closer in the near future, but
yeah, we did not forget about the Dark Knight. If anyone was wondering,
no, not
the
at
Dark
all.
Knight trilogy. So
no.
Hold on to your butts. as
Right.
Spielberg would say.
Right. But right now is The Prestige and the story of, honestly,
Tangiers and
I would
Doorman.
say if you were to say this movie was about anything, it would be about two men who are obsessed with destroying each other. That's like the heart
Um,
of the movie. I think that is.
I might go so far as to say two men who are obsessed with the other man's secret, and that is the genesis of their destruction, their own destruction, is because they're so obsessed with the other man's secret
I
that
could see that. I could see that because the first secret is, aside from what happened in the opening scene where Hugh Jackman's character dies, is whether or not Christian Bale knows what knot he tied on Hugh Jackman's wife before she went into the locked water tank where she dies. And that obsession drives Hugh Jackman to go to one of Christian Bale's magic shows and sabotage it, so he ends up getting shot. Um, and that's kind of the first tit for tat, and then it just escalates from there and goes farther and farther until these two men end up essentially destroying their lives,
right.
trying to get one over on the other guy, figure out their secret, and in essence win. Whatever that means in that context is a little bit fuzzy, but there's definitely this competitiveness between the two.
And it's interesting that, and here's a little mini spoiler alert. That first secret that you mentioned, as far as what knot is tied, is kind of the only one that is not resolved. You're kind of left to make your own assumptions about that point by the end. And after everything that's revealed at the end, it actually makes it even more confusing as to what exactly happened at the beginning. But Christopher Nolan likes that. Like we said, Inception kind of hinges on that idea of the ambiguity.
Right, right. I mean, just it's such a big theme, and I know we've said it before, but it's just such a big theme in Christopher Nolan's work across the board. Looking back at his second movie, Memento, I mean, that's just one big mess of I don't know what happened. So
Yeah, all culminating at the end. It's insane.
exactly, yeah. So anyway, on to our last movie, Interstellar. And I feel like most people probably know what that's about. But do you wanna give a brief summary anyway?
Yes, we don't want to assume that everyone has seen it, and hopefully we can encourage some people to go see it.
Exactly.
So I'll describe it as best I can because this one is rather expansive. It's really an adventure story, a futuristic adventure. So we start with a family. We start with Matthew McConaughey, who plays a character named Cooper, and his daughter and his son, Murph and Tom Murphy. Murph is short for Murphy. And we just kind of get to see their relationship. I mean, we obviously know that he's a very good dad. He loves his family. We find out that his wife died, and his wife's father lives with them on this farm that they have where they're raising corn right next to mountains, which is weird because you really can't do that unless you're really trying hard. And then we learn that the earth started to run out of food for one reason or another. And so we're back to kind of an agrarian society so that we can have as much food as possible because the population is in rapid decline due to malnutrition and starvation. And this all kind of plays a backdrop to the character story of Cooper and especially Murph. So anyway, through a series of gravitational anomalies that they find in their farm home, they are led to an underground organization that they find out to be NASA, which is organizing a trip into a wormhole that has appeared outside of Saturn, which leads across the universe to somewhere that has other worlds that humans can possibly inhabit, since the Earth is running out of food. So
Right.
Matthew McConaughey's character gets kind of enlisted to man this mission with 3 other astronauts and go off in search of new worlds. And then what follows is their experiences on the worlds that they're able to get to. That's the short version.
Right. It's a quest to save the human race. It's a question as to what saving the human race means,
And more intimately, it's a it's
whether
a
or
quest
not saving.
for a father and daughter to be reunited.
Right. That's kind of the emotional core of the movie, and it's hinted at in the movie that if they can reunite, they have a chance at saving the human race. So the stakes are high, folks. I don't think the stakes get much higher than that.
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that account, but I don't think the entire human race. That's a pretty high bar to set in terms of
pretty big
stakes.
stakes.
Yeah, big stakes, man. Big stakes.
So this is we touched on this a little bit in our Shane Carruth episode a couple weeks ago, but this is another example of a science fiction film that feels more like a character drama than a science fiction film, because we get so deeply ingrained in the emotions of these characters that, I mean, even people I know who I've watched this with, who are not like huge science fiction aficionados or anything, cry during this movie because it's such an emotional roller coaster, just given the character dynamics. And I think that is really a hallmark of great science fiction. It's science fiction that deals so deeply with the people that, I mean, it takes you on an emotional roller coaster from start to finish.
Right. It's kind of this idea of transcending genre in a way, and I might be using that term wrong, but
I think it fits into some of the themes of the film, such as the fact that gravity and love can transcend dimensions like time and space, which is present throughout the entire film. Those two themes, love and gravity, essentially. So yeah, I think the fact that it uses those two things to, transcend it into a genre that can't be completely nailed down. I mean, you can say it's science fiction because there is a lot of science in the film, and
right.
I mean, they definitely did their research when going into it. And of course, it's not perfect. No science fiction film will ever be perfect, so stop nitpicking it.
Right.
This one is just an amazing journey. It's a beautiful journey, and ultimately, it's about the characters.
Right. And I think that's something that's, and I think I rambled about this a little bit in the Carruth podcast, but it's something that's really important in terms of a film, especially a film that someone would peg as a genre film, to not just be a series of genre tropes that are just like, okay, this thing always happens in a science fiction film, so let's have it happen in this film, and then have those events strung together by a loose plot and a weak emotional arc, but to really use those as the backbone of a story that can be really amazing and really heartfelt and touching and complex and deep and did I mention complex? Because it's really complex.
It's very complex.
Almost circular in a way. But it's and not just sci-fi. This goes beyond sci-fi to westerns and rom-coms and all kinds of genres where if you can come away without the thought in your head that, oh, that was a nice little sci-fi, or oh, that was a nice little western, then you know you're dealing with like a really good movie there. You're dealing with something that's more than just the genre within which it's framed.
Yeah. So just kind of touch on some technical things. We get probably the least amount, but we're still getting temporal cross-cutting in this film. We've
Quite
got,
literally.
Yeah, quite literally. So in the beginning of the film, we're seeing just randomly cut into the scenes that we're watching are these little interviews that seem like an old like a History Channel documentary about the Dust Bowl, essentially, which is a bunch of really old people kind of describing what living in a dust bowl situation is like. You know, flipping plates over when you put them away. You know, covering your mouth with strips of cloth and stuff like that.
Right.
So that gets pulled back in later, but it's kind of used as a narration, and it's not explained at the beginning until 3 hours later, because it's such a long movie.
Right.
But it's a really good way, and I think we'll talk on this in a second in the overall notes. It's a really good way of creating your exposition for the story without feeling like characters are just kind of feeding us stuff. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing, but we get the sense, like, we understand why they're being so expositional. And it's just kind of a
It's obviously
subtle
this
narration. Yeah.
talking head documentary setup.
So one quick thing about Interstellar, kind of tying it into last week's episode, which was our thematic Lost at Sea week, is that this is almost an extension of a Lost at Sea film set in a science fiction environment. And there's even, I thought it was kind of funny, a reference to yachtsmen who can't swim, kind of like All Is Lost, which we watched last week.
Right.
And then he calls the ship their boat. It's just kind of floating, and then once things start going haywire, it really becomes that survive with what you have situation in space and do what you can, with a lot more thrown in. But that's kind of, it's almost like the Lost at Sea subgenre, which was the bottom Lego piece that a bunch of Lego pieces were added to make this one big film called Interstellar. Right. All right, so let's get into some overall Christopher Nolan notes and get into our spoiler section so we can dive really deep into some of these movies. So if you are intending to see any of these films, you can pause the podcast now and come back later, because there are some things that we're going to talk about now that it will be probably a lot more enjoyable for you to have seen the film before you hear what is to follow.
Yep. Okay, so it was all set up by Cobb. Surprise, they were twins the entire time. And Coop travels through a black hole and the fifth or fourth dimension to go across the universe and reunite with his daughter and save the human race. Boom. Spoiled.
Also, they're betrayed by Michael Caine.
Oh, yeah.
That was the worst.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I know you were hurt by that. You were like deeply, like personally betrayed.
I felt betrayed by Michael Caine. It's okay.
It's okay. You just have to go watch some Batman movies, and it'll be all right again.
Batman and Secondhand Lions, and then I'll love Michael Caine again.
There you
go. So one of the first things I want to talk about across all three of these films is the way in which he does exposition and the way that he kind of guides us through the story, which we've touched on a little bit for each of these. But I think it's interesting that in your notes you were saying that he doesn't use voiceover or narration or any of this stuff to introduce us to the films.
I think that was an early note.
Oh, was it? Okay.
That was from the start of Following, because he doesn't really. It's not really a voiceover in Following. It's the interview.
Right, but I mean, he L cuts it into a voiceover like pretty heavily.
I guess, but I don't think that's really a voiceover at that point. It's because it's diegetic. It's not a direct address to the audience. The same thing in the Prestige is it's not again it's not a direct address to the audience. It's just it's a diegetic voiceover. It's part of the story where either it's Michael Caine explaining the three stages of a magic trick at the beginning, or it's the two magicians, Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, reading their journals to each other and reading them out loud as if that character were narrating their own story.
Right, but that's the point. Is that at that point it becomes our narrator.
True. Which ties back into the whole idea of maybe they're possibly faulty narrators, and definitely in the case of the Prestige, where we learn that both of these journals are blinds. They both end in kind of the same way, where they're like, "Ha, psych, gotcha, I played you," to the other magicians who they knew would get their hand on their journals.
Right, and they weren't blatantly deceptive within the narrative of the journal, but it was more of just kind of an abrupt cutoff to where it stops before the important information that they were waiting for, as opposed to kind of lying the whole time. Because I think the narrative accounts were accurate, weren't they?
Well, they could have been accurate. We don't know. The turnaround at the end kind of gives the idea that maybe some of the stuff in the earlier journal wasn't true, because it was always intended to be a ploy.
Okay.
Or maybe not always intended, but definitely preconceived towards the end to be a ploy. So maybe some information was withheld, or some information was altered. And at the very least, it's definitely a very subjective account. I mean, any journal that you pick up.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you or I were to write a journal of our lives, it would be subjective to our point of view. It wouldn't be completely objective, because that would be impossible.
Yeah. And similarly, in Following, we have our no-named character giving an account of this whole story to a police officer. So that's our first little tease, like, okay, how did he end up beat up in a police station giving this testimonial, essentially? And so he kind of becomes our narrator, and he'll appear again and again kind of throughout the film. And we can take that, I think we can assume that the account he's giving is as true as he believes it to be. And then once we get to the end, where we find out that certain things that Cobb told him were true, the cop says are not true. Right. Suddenly we have to kind of reimagine certain parts of the story to make the two accounts fit, because the cop's account kind of supersedes our no-name character's account, and right. Then it all has to fit, but our guide was misguided, essentially.
Right, and you end up having to rethink the story a few times over the course of the film, and I think that goes back to one of the interviews that we're going to post with Christopher Nolan, where he talks about how he likes constructing plots the same way that you would tell a story in real life, where you start telling the story and then you forget a bit, so you go back and you're like, well, it actually happened like this, and then you continue going, which is kind of how each of his plots function in a very broad sense, as they start very, very in the middle of the overall story. The story timeline is where the plot starts, and then it'll go back and show us something, and then maybe flip back and show us a little more, flip back and show us a little more, until we eventually drive past the point where we started to a new ending and the final ending.
Sometimes, and we're mostly talking about the Prestige and the Following here.
Yeah, I think definitely
But
The Prestige and The Following. Less
so
so in
the
Interstellar
following,
because it's more practical.
yeah, it's a little bit more straightforward with those, like we said, the museum interviews cut in just to kind of give us some reference.
Right.
But like the following, we're getting his account to the police officer, which is the very end, and then we're getting the beginning. So we're getting the end and the beginning at the same time, and then we kind of move to the middle, which helps us connect all the way the end gets to the beginning. So that the middle kind of happens at the end in a
Right.
weird way.
Right. And I haven't done this yet, but I know it exists at least on the Criterion DVD version of Following, where Christopher Nolan recut the movie to be in chronological order.
Oh, really?
Yes, and from what I've heard, it works really well. Like it's still a great movie, but it's definitely more unique and I think a better experience in the theatrical release, which is the main release that we watched this week and that we're discussing. But I think it's definitely a testament to the story to see that it works well mixed up and straightforward, and it's also like an interesting signature to see like how Christopher Nolan's mind thinks when he as an auteur when he's developing these plots, but either with himself or with his brother, where it works straightforward and then maybe it's chopped up and replaced like you would mix up like chop up the plot, throw it in a hat and pull out pieces, but he does it artistically, like he does it with purpose. He's not doing it randomly.
And you can do the same thing with Memento. I wonder if anyone has done that. I mean, that
Oh, I'm sure someone
is
has.
less kind of is less, jumping back and forth between the beginning and the middle and the end and throwing all these pieces at us, and it's more like just straight backwards to forwards kind of a thing.
Right.
So we already touched on this a little bit, but one of the kind of pervasive moods of Christopher Nolan films is his film noir vibe in all of them. Almost every one of his films can fit. No, I'll go so far as to say it. I think every one of his films can fit into the film noir genre. I think after Following, though, we'd probably term it neo-noir, which is just noir film with color, essentially.
I mean, that's pretty much the cutoff point that you're working with. Yeah.
Yeah, is the invention of color, and then after that you get a lot of films like Blade Runner and stuff that use color heavily in their noir aspect. Probably throwing Vertigo into that too.
Right.
So I think definitely Inception fits into the neo-noir. Clearly all of the Batman films, I mean, they're called the Dark Knight films, fit into this neo-noir genre.
Yeah, definitely the dark angle there. Yeah.
So Insomnia definitely fits in the noir film because it goes to some very dark places thematically, as well as having a very eerie cinematic vibe, especially towards the climax. And it's actually a remake of a Norwegian film, which also fits in the noir genre. Interstellar may be the hardest link to noir.
I think at the very least you can call all of his films gritty.
Yeah.
Like grounded, and I think that applies to very much to Prestige and Interstellar, even though those are the two that I think are most on the bubble for not being considered neo-noir, but
and you bring up gritty. That's kind of a term that I think was coined specifically to describe Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. So just to kind of define those terms, I think when we talk about dark and gritty, I mean, the dark refers to the tone of kind of a suppressed,
serious.
It feels
I know.
very grim overall, and then the gritty
kind of appeals to the look and the feel of the film.
Yeah, I think gritty invokes the idea of morally ambiguous characters which pervade Christopher Nolan's work. this idea of not knowing exactly who you can trust, and to what extent you can trust them, and that is all over Christopher Nolan. So dark and gritty can definitely be applied to every one of Christopher Nolan's films.
True. I mean, Batman Begins is, and I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure Batman Begins is the quintessential dark and gritty reboot that we love. We love to make jokes about these days. But,
Yeah. And many have tried to do the same thing afterwards with limited success. But we're not going to get into that too much.
That's the podcast we deserve, but not the one we need right now.
And we will leave it at that. So,
but I definitely think that all of them at least fit dark and gritty, because that's
kind of a hallmark of classic noir.
Exactly. So those themes and the feel carry over, even if maybe Interstellar isn't so much a mystery movie on the scale that you would think of following as a mystery noir type film, type story.
Right. And it doesn't have the same impressionistic lighting and stuff, and different Nolan films have that kind of lighting and cinematography to different degrees. The Batman films probably fall more heavily into the noir lighting scheme. So I'm interested to see how these things that we've talked about are going to show themselves in Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan's upcoming film.
Right. It'll be very interesting to see an auteur director who is already super famous for doing dark and gritty, for doing an especially dark and gritty topic.
Yeah,
I'm very curious. I don't think a war movie's been made in the past 3 or 4 decades that hasn't been dark and gritty. So
ever since Saving Private Ryan, honestly, I think that was kind of
I think you can go back farther. I think you can go back to like Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, that's true.
And that whole wave of filmmakers coming off of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, kind of brought that into the war landscape, and now that's kind of the pervasive way we've seen war depicted in film. And that'll be really interesting to see how that's done. And also, I think he can do. I think there's a lot. I can think of a lot of opportunities right now that to play with time in a battle setting that I think Christopher Nolan is just going to have a field day with.
Yeah, and I can already see it in the trailer. One of the first teaser trailers had this kind of ticking metronome sound in the score underneath it, and that was kind of what it hinged on. And I think that's the one that was just one shot of this boat full of soldiers that all slowly turn around and look up at the sky, but you have this ticking sound, and that's kind of so I think time is definitely going to be something that will be manipulated in a Christopher Nolan-y way somehow. But I'm interested in the fact that the genre is so different from other things that he's done, in the fact that it's a historical drama, a straight historical drama, that I don't think he's done something like that. So it'll be interesting to see his take on that kind of film.
Right. It might get him a little closer in some people's minds to being in the same category as a Spielberg, which I know is something that annoys me. But what do you think when people try to say that Nolan isn't in the same category as Spielberg, or he isn't a great mainstream director?
Right. I think some of that criticism comes from the fact that he's not quite as well-rounded. I mean, we go back to our Spielberg week, and we had Always, which is romantic comedy. We had Raiders, which was a classic action adventure film. Mm-hmm. And then we had Lincoln, which is the historical drama. And Christopher Nolan's films seem to center more closely around crime drama.
Right. He kind of follows this more modern idea of an auteur director's body of work, where they make it tends to be like one film every 2 or 3 years, and they all kind of have the same feel, even though they can cover a vast array of topics. Even though he's achieved this mainstream success, I think a lot of people are hesitant to put him in the same category as Spielberg, even though that's kind of what his movies feel like when I watch them. I think that this is, I think of him as a highly skilled, highly creative director,
Highly intelligent.
a very smart director with very smart movies, who's lent his talents to mainstream blockbusters.
Yeah, and if you want to,
which is not something you see too much these days.
Right, and I don't you can't debate his mainstream success. Show anyone a picture of Heath Ledger's Joker, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. I mean, Batman.
Why so serious has kind of pervaded the common culture. Some men just want to watch the world burn, like I quoted earlier, has pervaded our language. So there may not be as many of those films that are household names like Indiana Jones and Jaws and stuff, but I still think the quality of the work is at the level, and even if the quantity isn't there, and I don't think you can dock him for quantity.
No, and he's still young. He has time to put out the same body of work that Spielberg does, and Spielberg's like 70 or something.
Yeah, and we can see him branching out already with this historical drama that's coming out.
Right. That's the kind of film that, like, I think more than any other film, that's going to get a lot of critical attention, a lot of awards attention.
Yeah.
Which is going to put him up in that conversation. I also don't think that it's really possible to have a Spielberg type anymore. I don't think the market that we see with
the directors who are just after the film brat generation.
Right. This current generation that's in the prime of their working years has already matured, has a body of work out there. Your Christopher Nolan, your Wes Andersons, and so on and so forth. There's several that I can't name off the top of my head, but they don't. The market share isn't available in the same way that it was in 1970.
The American New Wave, where
it
was just
no movie is going to premiere to the same amount of people as Jaws did, because
Star Wars or any of that.
Jaws or Star Wars, because when those movies came out, they were the it thing. Everyone went to go see that movie.
It was the revitalization of Hollywood.
Right. Nowadays, you just wait for it to come out on a streaming site, or you don't even bother with movies at all. You just watch TV shows made by a streaming site. Everything's so niche, everything's so specialized that I don't think anybody could achieve mainstream success after mainstream success in the way that Spielberg did, where everybody from that generation knows what Jaws is, knows what Star Wars is, knows what Indiana Jones is. I don't think that's possible in a modern day setting.
In a different light, I mean, you've got all of Christopher Nolan's films are good films. I don't think he has his weakest film might be Insomnia, which itself has somewhat of a cult critical following. So I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, I think Christopher Nolan has less flops than even Steven Spielberg does.
True, and that might be a part of the side effect of just longevity of career. Although I know 1941 was fairly early in Spielberg's
Spielberg had
career
already
too.
had a couple flops by the time he was at the point that Christopher Nolan is at now.
Right, and that isn't anything against Spielberg.
No, absolutely not.
It's a credit. It's a credit to Christopher Nolan that he's
everything he does is intentional. Everything he's going to put his name on, he wants to be the best that it can be.
Yeah, which I think is probably the best you can hope for, and not in a bad way. Like it's a little something. It's it's a really great thing to aspire to, and I think it's maybe the most worthwhile thing you can aspire to in the current media climate, and that's changing rapidly these days. And it'll be different in 5 years. It'll be different in 10 years. So who knows? We could be wrong on that, but
Absolutely. But
I think it's just going to fragment more and more. But anyway, not the point. The point is Christopher Nolan makes great movies.
And like we said, he's still in his prime. He's branching out. So I am very excited to see what comes next from Christopher Nolan.
Right. Exactly. And of all of the directors we've talked about so far, I think Christopher Nolan's is the most worth watching in the theaters.
Yeah.
I'll
agree with that.
His visual style is just something that should be seen in theaters.
And his narrative development is something that, watching it before hearing chatter about how the story is developed, is probably something you want to get in on before you have a chance for things to be spoiled, because it's just such an incredible journey to watch a film like his without knowing where it's going and just let him take you on a ride.
Right. They're great opening weekend movies.
All right, so let's wrap up and kind of talk about what we're going to be watching for next week. Next week is going to be something new that I think we'll be doing more of, but this is the first time we're going to be doing specifically an adaptation week. And we're going to be doing 3 films that are all adapted from the same work, which will be Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, since the episode will be coming out on Valentine's Day. So we have picked the 3 most different adaptations we could possibly find, starting with 2003, Pride and Prejudice, starring Cam Heskin and Orlando Seal. This is a modern adaptation set in the 90s/2000s, early 2000s. And so that's our example of a modern adaptation. Our second version will be the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden. And that is set in the period, so it's more accurate to the story, if abbreviated, as all of these will be, because the story is way too long to put into a single film. And our final adaptation will be Pride and Prejudice and Zombies from 2016. This version is period, but has a little...
Air quotes on period.
Yeah, it has a little fantastical element with zombies, and I don't think either of us really know what to expect for that one, so it's going to be fun to compare them to...
idea.
Yeah, the true adaptation and the modern adaptation.
It seems like a good fit for Valentine's Day, though. I don't know.
Yeah,
you just think romance. You think zombies.
Romance and zombies, yeah. You've got something for the girls, something for the guys, something for everyone next week, so we hope you tune in.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at jssatchel.wordpress.com/blog.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.